What are territorial disputes? They are disagreements over the possession of control of land between two or more political entities, i.e. countries. Sometimes these disputes aren't relevant anymore, existing only on paper. Sometimes they are simply diplomatic concerns, and thankfully only a small number escalate into either military skirmishes or even less into a full-out war. Considering that Russia has recently escalated one of their de facto territorial disputes into an invasion and military conflict, I thought it would be interesting to do two things. First, quickly go back to the territorial dispute at the source of the conflict, and second, take a look at a few other territorial disputes they have or have had with other countries that border them. So let's start with Ukraine. Russia's claims on Ukrainian territory take place in two steps. Crimea was first in 2014 when Russia-backed forces took power and established a pro-Russian government in the peninsula who first declared independence and later incorporation into the Russian Federation. Crimea had been a part of Ukraine since the country regained its independence after the fall of the Soviet Union. In fact, it was Ukrainian even before then. Initially a part of Russia, Crimea was transferred to Ukraine when both countries were a part of the USSR. Through an act of territorial reorganization in 1954, Crimea was transferred to Ukraine on the basis of the integral character of the economy, the territorial proximity, and the close economic and cultural ties between the Crimea province and the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic. Not only was Russia's takeover a violation of this, their own Pereyaslav Agreement, but also a violation of the Budapest Memorandum of 1994 when Ukraine agreed to give up its Soviet-era nuclear weapons in return for the recognition and assurance of sovereignty by the US, UK, and most of all, Russia. Crimea is today fully controlled by Russia, but the dispute remains and is a part of the larger conflict. This larger conflict also involves a dispute over the regions of Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia, essentially the easternmost provinces of Ukraine. Later in 2014, Donetsk and Luhansk tried doing the same, declaring independence with Russia's support, with the end goal of being fully annexed by Russia. In 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, occupying much of Kherson and Zaporizhia too. The conflict continues with Ukraine resisting. I won't get into the invasion itself here, there's plenty of videos about it, but the logic of the dispute is pretty much summarized by the fact that these territories that are a part of Ukraine from a factual perspective, but also from the perspective of international law, are claimed by Russia due to the historical belonging of the territories to Russia and the supposed will of the local people who are in their majority Russian speakers. Adding to those, the supposed need to defend those people who they argue were being persecuted by Ukraine. This is the only territorial dispute that is currently in a state of military conflict. It's hard to tell until when. One other dispute that has been talked about very much due to the proximity to Ukraine is Transnistria in Moldova. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, some Moldovans started demanding unification with Romania. This was not well received in modern Gagauzia, where Russian speakers formed the majority. Differences erupted into the Transnistria War in 1992, followed by a Russian military intervention in Transnistria, where they are still stationed today. They argue they are a peacekeeping force, but in reality they protect the separatist regime and establish their own influence in an area that, according to some, wants to rejoin Russia entirely. Moldova have requested Russian withdrawal from what are legally their own lands, but to no avail so far. So now let's move on to the other disputes they have or have had in the past. In Georgia, disputes have existed since 2008 in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. These Russian-backed separatist regions of Georgia declared independence and were recognized by Russia, but Russia's support of them seems to be stepped in their desired annexation of them and their reconquest of the Caucasus, which they lost upon the fall of the Soviet Union. The Georgian parliament unanimously passed a resolution formally declaring these as Russian-occupied regions, and they remain as such until today. Another interesting one, although old, is with Norway. The first I came across when researching about this is actually a dispute that they were able to settle in 2010. This one existed for 40 years since 1970 and was about their Arctic border in the Barents Sea. Both countries claimed a 175,000 square kilometer zone, about half the size of Germany, just north of Russia's Kola Peninsula and the Norwegian coasts. The dispute started in the 70s because of fishing rights, but quickly escalated when the area was found to hold reasonable oil and gas reserves. However, the resolution was quite fair, simply dividing the disputed area equally between the two countries. It's strange how Russia's position back then was that all disputes must be tackled by way of talks and on the basis of international law. It's strange how they just ignored their own advice a decade later. Another dispute that exists is one with Japan over the Kuril Islands. The Kuril Islands are a chain of islands that stretch between the Japanese island of Hokkaido and the Russian Kamchatka Peninsula. Only 4 of the islands are in dispute: Etorofu, Kunashiri, Shikotan, and Apomai. They are 4 of the southernmost islands, and despite being claimed by Japan, they are administered by Russia, who at the time as the Soviet Union, unilaterally annexed them at the end of World War II. Russia claims their sovereignty was certified by post-war treaties. Japan disagrees and even claims the 2 lower islands are not even a part of the Kuril archipelago. In the 1875 Treaty of St. Petersburg, Russia and Japan agreed that Japan would give up all rights to Sakhalin in exchange for Russia giving up all rights to the Kuril Islands in favor of Japan. I believe Japan claims this is still the latest treaty in effect, justifying their claim, which was reinforced as recently as 2023. One small and kind of irrelevant dispute also exists with Kazakhstan over the Ukatny Island. This is an island located inside the Caspian Sea, located off the end of the Volga River. It's roughly 25 square kilometers and lies near an offshore oil producing area, probably justifying the dispute. According to Russia, administratively this island belongs to them, but Kazakhstan assumes the island as part of its historical territory. I couldn't find out who effectively controls it. I would guess Russia. 2 other small islands are disputed in the same way nearby, Zetsky and Mali Zemchuzny. And speaking of islands, they briefly had a territorial dispute with the US over Wrangel Island in the Chukchi Sea that borders Alaska. In 1881, there was an American expedition to it, claiming it for the US and naming it New Columbia. In 1911, the Russians arrived and claimed it as well for the Russian Empire. While further US expeditions were made, most effective control was by the Russians. It seems the US eventually just gave up on it, allowing the Russians to take it. One border issue that also took place, although here it's a little bit the other way around, are the disputes with Baltic nations. After World War II, the Soviet Union altered the borders of Baltic states, and while they gave back some land to Lithuania, they took away these areas in red from Estonia and Latvia, which remain so up to today. In 1991, upon regaining sovereignty with the collapse of the USSR, both Estonia and Latvia claimed the interwar borders were to be restored, but Russia did not follow. I believe this isn't an everyday topic for Estonia or Latvia, but the issue remains officially unresolved as far as I know. A similar situation happened with Finland, and some say the Karelian question remains an issue to some Finnish politicians who claim the areas taken by Russia in Karelia, Salla, and Petsamo should be returned. It was taken in 1940, 44 and held since then. According to an article by the Finnish newspaper Helsingin Sanomat in 2007, the Russian president at the time, Boris Yeltsin, unofficially offered to sell Karelia back to Finland in 1991 for $15 billion, but was declined. So, those are some of the most relevant, current, and historical disputes that Russia has when it comes to territory. I believe I covered all the current ones. If I forgot any, please let me know. And the historical ones, I believe, are also some of the most relevant for modern times because of the consequences that they bring up to today. What do you think about this topic and each of these disputes? Do you think any others will escalate into a military conflict? And do you think Russia will be able to diplomatically solve any of the others? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching this video. Subscribe if you want, and I will see you next time for more general knowledge.